What else did I do? Change light bulbs. And there are a lot of light bulbs around here, did you know that? And lots of doors.
This church, for me, has a spirit that is very hard for me to try to find words for.
When I was going through whatever I was going through, there were so many members in this congregation who were there to say, you know, it's pretty bad now, but it's going to be better.
I can't imagine my life without this church. I can't imagine. I can't imagine.
How do you explain First Christian Church of North Hollywood to somebody that's never experienced it? You say, come on, I got to show you something. There's something on the corner of Colfax and Moore Park that's just going on. It's just wonderful.
At the turn of the century, the San Fernando Valley was a sleepy farming community growing wheat, fruit, and vegetables. It wasn't until the valley was connected to the city of Los Angeles by road and rail that the area began to develop. It was known as the home of the peach, and the town of Lankershim was located on the easternmost portion of what had once been the vast grazing lands of Mission San Fernando. To get a share of the precious Owens Valley River water, most valley communities had agreed to become part of the city of Los Angeles, which by 1910 reported a population of 320,000. It wasn't until 1923, however, that the independent town of Lankershim found it necessary to become part of the growing giant. Most of the people of Lankershim were hard-working farmers, and they were used to working hard to secure the things they wanted. A small group of these pioneers had been holding an adult Bible study class in Duncan Hall above a store on Magnolia Boulevard, just east of Lankershim. In early 1924, one of the participants, a Mr. A.K. Finley of Burbank, volunteered to make a door-to-door survey to determine if there was enough support to establish a Disciples of Christ church. Soon after, a tent was erected at the corner of Magnolia and Lankershim, and preachers from Los Angeles and Hollywood came for a series of evangelistic meetings. And as a result, in July of 1924, a charter was drawn up, and the First Christian Church of Lankershim was born. After the church was organized, services were held in Duncan Hall, and Mr. S.A. Roberts from Hollywood became the minister, preaching his first sermon on the last Sunday of July, 1924. During the first year, 45 new members were added, 25 by confession of faith and 20 by transfer. Less than 4 months later, it was decided to build a real church. Property was offered on Hartsook Street, a few blocks west of Lankershim. Groundbreaking ceremonies were held in November 1924, and most of the building was done by the members. On January 11, 1925, the cornerstone was laid, and services were held in the building for the first time. But there were to be many hard times ahead. The following years were lean ones for the church. Records show that during 1926, only $88.90 was received. And by 1932, the little church had barely 100 members. In the church notice section of the local newspaper, the First Christian Church wasn't even mentioned. In 1936, the retirement of Reverend Roberts led to another period of crisis. After hearing several candidates, the congregation selected Mr. Amos Roadhouse, who proved to be a very powerful speaker but somewhat independent in nature. After Mr. Roadhouse had served only 2 years, the congregation arrived one Sunday to discover that he had resigned without notice, and the search for a new minister was on. In July of 1939, Reverend Kenneth Helm was called as pastor, and by the end of his first year, active membership in the church climbed to 215. As the First Christian Church reached its 15th anniversary, it had already played a significant role in the spiritual growth of what was now North Hollywood, which, with the rest of the valley, was about to experience an unprecedented boom.
I'm Margaret Wilkes. I think officially I've been part of the church since 1943, when we moved to the valley from Beverly Hills, from our home on Lemp Avenue, 3 blocks from here. We could see 5 houses, and it was through those early years at Hartsook that the valley was growing rapidly. Lockheed had a booming thing all through the war. Houses were needed for people who were employed there. So the valley began to open up.
For a small congregation on Hartsook Street, the early 1940s would be a time of crisis and rapid change to meet rapidly changing conditions. Under the leadership of Kenneth Helm, membership showed some growth, but ailing finances remained a perpetual problem. In the spring of 1941, the church began to need repairs. When the Nazarene Church offered to purchase the property for $4,250, the congregation voted to accept and seek a new site for a new church building. At a special congregational meeting in July 1942, a site for a new church was chosen on Moore Park Street between Tujunga Boulevard and Backman Avenue. It would seem almost unbelievable that so small a group would have the courage to undertake the building of a new house of worship. But despite wartime priorities being in effect, materials were obtained, and largely with do-it-yourself labor, the Little White Chapel became a reality. It was dedicated on Palm Sunday 1943, and according to church historian Dorothy Hall, all who worshiped there could feel the reflection of the warmth and love of the men who had built it. While the Little White Church was a blessing, the strain involved with its building had taken its toll, and Reverend Helm, who had a heart condition, asked for and received a year's leave of absence. Once again, the First Christian Church of Lancashire was faced with the task of finding a new minister. Many fine disciple ministers had come as guest speakers, among them a young and energetic 25-year-old pastor of the South Pasadena Church.
My name is Merle Edison Fish, Jr., and I use the Jr. because my father was quite a prominent minister, and I figured people would get us mixed up. We were associated with the First Christian Church since 1943 until 1958, 15 years.
He preached his first sermon on August 29, 1943. The people liked him, and when it became known that Reverend Helm was not returning, Reverend Fish was asked to consider the pastorate of the church.
The church was pretty bleak. I don't even think there was any lawn. I remember the baptistry was leaking that night all over the floor, and it didn't really look like it had much to offer, but there was something very exciting about those people that were there that night. They were just so anxious to get a church going.
He was young, full of energy. He had great drive and kept the congregation inspired, and of course gave good leadership, not only spiritually to the church, but in a very practical way as we moved into an enlarging program.
Under the new minister's youthful and vigorous leadership, the persistent financial problems were tackled head-on. By the end of Reverend Fish's first year, the membership had grown from 93 to 165, and the offerings had tripled. From a near-desperate situation, a few short years had seen a transition to an era of stability, vigor, and great promise, in large part thanks to Reverend Fish's emphasis on evangelism.
Well, we had visitation. We did this regularly. People would go out in couples, and we would go out calling. We'd have an evening, and we'd go out calling on couples and invite them to join the church. And that's the way it grew, primarily.
The year 1945 saw many firsts for First Christian Church. Due to increased stewardship, the property was able to be paid off and a ceremonial mortgage burning was held. Beginning on Palm Sunday, a second service was added. The summer of '45 saw the start of the Vacation Bible School, in which 104 children enrolled. And the prayer group was started, meeting one morning each week at 6 a.m. to pray for the church and members who were ill.
It was, as I recall, a very warm place, a place of tremendous activity. There were so many children around in my memory. And the buildings were kind of separated from each other. The sanctuary, as I recall, was separated from the Sunday school kitchen area. And we used more or less a parking lot for a lot of our Sunday school classes. It was taking whatever you have and making something work.
By 1948, growth in every phase of church activity was so rapid, the search for a wholly new building site seemed imperative.
Here we were in this little bitty church with 3 services going. Every Sunday, more people. We had to do something.
The choice of location soon narrowed to property at the corner of Colfax Avenue and Moorpark Street. Plans for a spacious new church structure were presented to the congregation, but were not unanimously accepted. The sheer audacity of the undertaking, combined with affection for the little white chapel, caused some members to greet the proposal with reluctance. Nevertheless, after spirited debate, the ambitious plan was approved.
We were just so thrilled to be able to build the church. If ever a building was built on faith, it was this building.
There was no accumulated wealth there in the church, and there weren't any people who were really had any wealth. There were no big gifts, huge gifts. So to go from this little piece of property, it was every conceivable kind of fundraiser. And those people would go out calling in groups to raise funds to build the church, plus every kind of a carnival, fair, event that you could think of. It was quite remarkable.
You don't work together like that without building strong relationships. We had a common motive. We were all hard workers. We were all committed. And these were young families committed to God and feeling a responsibility to carry on the work of the church. We felt that we were a church family.
Finally, with the help of a generous loan from the Board of Church Extension, enough money was on hand to begin construction, and groundbreaking took place on April 24, 1949.